Hey everybody, welcome into a special edition of Fireside Chats right here in good old Classroom 3, somewhere we haven't been in the last couple of days due to the pre-comps. Before we get going, I just want to note, Rangers, take a peek. I did award you guys the points that you earned in the 4th hour class. However, I haven't figured out the 3rd hour controversy yet, so that will be pending tomorrow. Now, speaking of tomorrow, just remember we have a quiz on Reconstruction, one question, short answer format, so be ready for that. And parts of this will not be included on that quiz, so just be aware of that. But this is for you guys' discussion that we'll have after the quiz is over. So we left off with talking about how the demise of the Republican Party, thanks to many of the scandals and economic woes that erupted during Grant's second term, the Panic of 1873, the Credit Mobilier scandal, and then, of course, the Whiskey Ring scandal, all weakened the Republican Party's perception amongst the general public in the United States. That really hampered Reconstruction, primarily because with the weakened Republican Party and so much internal conflict going on in the Republican Party, the Democrat Party would really rise out of the ashes of Reconstruction and the Civil War. And by 1876, the Democrat Party will begin to start winning state elections and winning state seats in the federal government back. And that will mark an incredible Phoenix-like rise for the Solid South. That term Solid South, of course, I've used before in other classes, and that basically, again, refers back to the antebellum South, the old tradition, the old guard of the South, who step by step have fought Reconstruction through ways such as sharecropping, through black codes, through intimidation, through violent paramilitary groups like the White League and the KKK, and even the Red Shirts, who I'll talk about later on. But the real rise back to prominence politically for the South started to creep in around the same time during Grant's second term, when the Republican Party was sort of being knocked around and battered due to scandal and misalignment in terms of political policies. Reconstruction was becoming a less favorable agenda, and so therefore the Republicans were not committing to Reconstruction nearly as much as it had before. All this contributes to the Democrats' rise. Now, the rise of the Democrats is often titled as the redemption, and the ex-Confederate leaders who rose out of the ashes are called the Southern Redeemers. If you ever see that term used in the context of a U.S. history test, it's referring to the Reconstruction era and the Southerners who came back to power to redeem themselves once again and to institute new policies of the South. Oftentimes, these redeemers were referred to as Southern Bourbons, and that was a reference back to the old French Revolution, pre-French Revolution, monarchical power, the ruling family of France, the Bourbon family. So whether you call them Redeemers or Bourbons, I would go with Redeemers first, but Bourbons would be added demonstration of your knowledge about the Reconstruction era. The Redeemers play a really pivotal role because they are, for the most part, ex-Confederate leaders or ex-Confederate generals or people with Confederate sympathies who came back to win elections in the South during the 1870s and 80s. And it's thanks to these Redeemers that state governments and state legislatures began to pass anti-African American, anti-civil rights agendas like the Jim Crow laws I keep alluding to, like voting restrictions such as literacy tests, poll taxes, grandfather clauses. The Redeemers are a big part of that. They are the ones responsible for ushering in a whole new era of civil rights in the Deep South. And by 1884, so looking ahead a couple years after Reconstruction ends, by 1884, the Southern Redeemers, the Bourbons, the Democrats, whatever you want to associate them with, have captured all 11 states back. That is a remarkable turning point in a very short period of time. About 20 years after the Civil War, the South is firmly back in control of all state governments. And by the 1880s, a Democrat president will be elected. And that marks a shift once again in the American political spectrum. But before we get into the 1880s, we got to talk about a presidential election that totally reinvented the word compromise. The presidential election of 1876. With Grant out of the picture, a new former Union general would rise to the challenge of trying to keep up the Republican vanguard. And an Ohio native named Rutherford B. Hayes would be the Republican candidate heading into the presidential election of 1876. Hayes' staunchest opponent was a liberal Democrat. And by liberal Democrat, I mean a Democrat who supported industry, a Democrat who supported reform but still maintained some of the anti-Reconstruction policies that the Democrat Party stood against. And that was a New Yorker named Samuel Tilden. So Hayes versus Tilden is the presidential election of 1876. Hayes wins the electoral vote by one vote, 185 to 184. And you guys know what the stipulation in the 12th Amendment is. If there's a close vote, it goes down to the House of Representatives and is determined there in Congress. Get ready for this because the circumstances are a little bit crazy. So Hayes will win the presidency. That you should know already if you know a little bit about presidencies. Hayes wins the presidency. But how he gets there is a remarkable story. Tilden and Hayes actually unofficially, this is all like behind closed doors and unofficially, worked out what was known as the Compromise of 1877. Because after all, remember, 1876, the election was in November. This wasn't decided until 1877 when the new president would take office. And the Compromise of 1877 basically stipulated four things that would grant Rutherford B. Hayes the necessary electoral votes that he needed to win the presidency. So compromise part number one. Hayes would remove all federal troops, Union federal troops from the South permanently. No more military presence at all in the South whatsoever. Point two, Hayes would nominate a Democrat candidate to the to his cabinet. So a Democrat would serve in his cabinet. And that eventually became the Postmaster General. So that's who Hayes appointed, a Democrat from Tennessee. The third part would be that federal money, Congress would vote and pass legislation to help connect the South to the Transcontinental Railroad that was being built out in California. So that would connect lines from Texas going all the way out to the Pacific. So that was the third point of the Compromise of 1877. And the last point was the Northern congressmen would pass legislation to help industrialize the South. 4 points of the compromise. And the agreement was if Hayes agreed to do all four, remove troops, nominate a Democrat to his cabinet, construct railroads, help pass legislation to construct railroads, and then, of course, industrialize the South, Hayes would receive 20 votes necessary from Southern electorates, and that would grant him the presidency, and that's exactly what happened. And tomorrow I will definitely add to the quiz. There's a really great cartoon. As you can tell, I'm all about the cartoons lately, baby. And the cartoons will show sort of the representation and the opinions of journalists at the time in regards to the election of 1876 and the ensuing Compromise of 1877. With that compromise, historians argue that Reconstruction was all but over at this point because shortly after Hayes' presidency, a Republican or Democrat would come to the White House. The Redeemers rose again and took back state governments in the South. And so the question that will really be burning tomorrow in our discussion post-quiz is going to be just how much was accomplished, what could have been done, what should have been done. We're going to really open the floor up and finish off Reconstruction. And then the last thing we'll look at is Plessy v. Ferguson, which is outside the boundaries of the Reconstruction timeline, but it does fit into this era and was certainly aided by cases like Cruikshank and the civil rights cases that we looked at today in class. So I kept this one short on behalf of the quiz. So study well tonight. You guys should have no problems with this if you guys are being aware of all the cartoons and all the discussions we've been having on Reconstruction. And we should be able to hit Reconstruction and finish it off tomorrow. So I wish you guys a good and happy Tuesday evening. Take care. And as always, the past shapes the future.